we saw Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who has particular grievances with Trump, saying the other day after he visited China that China was now a more reliable partner than America, certainly perhaps more predictable. And that caused a big backlash from Trump, who didn't like that at all.
So the Prime Minister, as we've been saying, is in China, but can he make that case to voters that getting closer to the country will make everybody feel better off? Let's speak to Richard Spencer, Times China correspondent, who's in Beijing. Richard, give us a flavour of what's on the table for discussion during this trip.
Yes, so he's been given the red carpet treatment tonight. He landed a couple of hours ago at Beijing Airport, got an honour guard. It isn't a state visit because he's not a head of state, but the Chinese are attaching quite a lot of importance to this visit. Even though we may think of Britain as being quite a small power these days, it's still a member of the permanent member of the Security Council. So, as you say, the end of this freeze that has been in place for the last few years is seen as good for China. The big question, of course, is what Starmer gets in return, and as you indicate, that's a lot less clear. He's brought with him 50 business people, chief executives, and of all the usual big companies, the pharmaceutical companies that do have a big presence here in China, for example, City of London, and so on. But in fact, those sort of trade relations don't seem to fluctuate very much, whether we're in an ice age or a golden era, if you actually look at the statistics.
Right.
And I don't think there's much sign that China is going to suddenly start importing lots of Chinese goods, British goods, even now. So I think there is a sense that at the moment, all world leaders should be talking to each other because as you say, we are in very uncertain times, even if just to get face to face being a bit better than Zoom calls, you know. So I think that's what, in real terms, Britain and China are getting out of this rather than anything particularly solid. Though, as you say, the Chinese have got their embassy and we presumably will be given our new embassy that we want in Beijing at the same time.
Well, it was certainly...
But in terms of stuff that you'll feel on the ground in Britain, probably not a lot.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Richard, because we talked about the choreography over the last few days, that permission for the super embassy had to come in order for the visit to sort of take place, even though it happened time-wise quite close together. If there isn't anything really tangible, what do you think is the best that Keir Starmer then can hope for if he's trying to make this link with cost of living here in the UK? Is it just about optics and symbolism?
Well, I'm sure there will be some trade deals signed, or something they will sell as a trade deal, or some memorandum of understanding. I mean, we do export something to China. I mean, it is a big trading partner. So, we shouldn't be perhaps too cynical about that. We export pharmaceuticals, we export cars, we export other goods. They like our fashion. Berber is very popular in China at the moment. And they sometimes like our sort of design and architecture skills. So we shouldn't be too sniffy about those sectors. I just don't think it's going to go up very far. And I think, it's important those things stay put. What slightly concerning perhaps is that the 5-year plan, which is, the 5-year plans are still very important in China. They're still a planning nation. They talk about localizing supplies much more. That talks about, making China big in the pharmaceutical industry. So that suggests rather less for Britain than we might, otherwise hope for. There is this issue of what China exports to Britain, and that's, the other side of the coin, if you like. Do we want to, see China, for example, set up car plants in Britain? There's talk of that, of one or two of the big China companies investing in Britain to build cars there. Europe isn't very receptive. They've got their own car industry to protect. But we're a free trading nation, and we might like that investment. But that won't necessarily be popular. But that's one of the things that will be discussed, I think.
I mean, one of the other aspects is on the sort of area of education, because the number of Chinese students in the UK is actually going up. Is that important in terms of the relationship between China and the UK?
It's very important, and again, it's very much, I think, being seen as a double-edged sword in Britain at the moment,
Yes.
perhaps also in China. It's a lot of people in academia don't think it's good for British universities to be so dependent for their income on students from one country. China was, some universities, particularly in London, UCL, King's London. I mean, they have an astonishing proportion of their total student population now from China. I think it's a quarter of students at UCL are from China. I mean, that's not just overseas students, that's all students. That's an incredible relationship and dependence, which some people aren't happy with. But on the other hand, it's bringing money into British education that we obviously all benefit from.
I mean,
And I don't think that's. I don't think that's going to be challenged very much in the next few years, given the state of the British economy.
What about the relationship with the United States and Donald Trump? How big a risk is there of upsetting Donald Trump? Bearing in mind, as you say, the relationship, despite it being described as on one hand golden age and then an ice age, things have been sort of relatively the same in trade terms.
Yeah, trade terms one thing, diplomatically very different. As you say, golden era to ice age, now back to something we're told a bit more in the middle of that, more in line with traditional British policy towards China, which was sort of pragmatic and rather nervous. I think it's probably best to say that. I don't. I mean, I think it depends what Starmer says when he's here. The American reaction will be. I mean, there's been no more fervent admirer of President Xi in recent years than President Trump, and he's coming to China in April himself. The American ambassador has been speaking this week about this, saying that Xi Jinping, the President Xi, will be going to America in August or September. Xi and Trump met last October and signed this big new trade deal between the two of them. So on the face of it, Trump hasn't got a lot to complain about. What people are looking at is whether there's going to be, whether this visit is going to end up as being part of a greater rift between the Western Alliance or within the Western Alliance. We saw Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who has particular grievances with Trump, saying the other day after he visited China that China was now a more reliable partner than America, certainly perhaps more predictable. And that caused a big backlash from Trump, who didn't like that at all.
Yes.
But I think Starmer, he's been trying to follow Trump much more closely. He's tried to stay in Trump's good books. Trump makes that quite difficult, for example, with his comments about, how NATO allies fought in Afghanistan the other day. But I really doubt myself that Starmer will go down that Carney line. I think if he does, then that will be quite a serious issue for the Western Alliance. But that's certainly what China's looking for. They certainly are seeking to make capital out of these rifts in the Western Alliance.
Yes, but as you say, it's unlikely. There's no evidence that Keir Starmer will go down a similar path to Mark Carney. Richard Spencer, Times' China correspondent, thank you very much for talking to us. Well, let's get a different view about this visit by the Prime Minister and the risks and potential rewards, and speak to Tim Lawton, former Tory MP who was sanctioned by China in 2021. Hello to you, Tim.
Hi, Jo.
Do you agree with the Prime Minister? China matters. We have to engage and not bury our heads in the sand.
I agree. China matters. But it matters, I'm afraid, more for negative things and the threats that it poses to our country and other Western countries, more than the positives of the opportunity that it offers. And frankly, to see the latest in a conveyor belt of Western leaders, Macron and Carney, and then Merz is going soon, to be given the red carpet treatment in Beijing to increase the credibility of the Chinese regime at a time when, just the last few days, we've had the latest stories about spies in Parliament, about hacking of phones at number 10. I'm still sanctioned, though still not an MP anymore. That attack on free speech in Parliament. We cannot treat China as any other trading partner. And I'm afraid he's going there looking as though he's got the begging bowl and we're going to kowtow to them. This is exactly the wrong impression to give.
Right. What about the quid pro quo that is always talked about with visits like this and vice versa, is that important human rights issues will be raised, whether it is about the fate of the Uyghurs or the case of Jimmy Lai. Do you accept that?
It's absolutely essential. And the only way you get through to the Chinese is by facing up to them, calling them out, and being prepared to take action if they don't comply with normal international law.
What action are you talking about?
Well, the first thing that Starmer should seek to achieve, and it would be a coup if he was able to do it, is to get Jimmy Lai, a British citizen, wrongly imprisoned for political reasons by the Chinese, to get him to be released. That will be a big demonstration of goodwill. I very much doubt it's going to happen. Secondly, the huge abuses of an international treaty between Britain and China over Hong Kong has been completely shredded by the Chinese. There are countless Hong Kong protesters in jail, have been there for years and years without trial. There are a number of citizens legally in the UK from Hong Kong who have $1 million bounties on their heads to be repatriated to China. These are the sorts of things that are completely unacceptable with any other normal Western country, and they've got to be called out for them.
Yes, but
and only when we've dealt with those can we deal with them as a normal trading partner.
Right, but as a normal trading partner, are you saying we should actually put or keep relations between UK and China in the fridge, in the ice age, to use Keir Starmer's phrase? There should be no thawing at all.
No, I think this whole terminology of ice age isn't helpful. We have to deal with the Chinese, but we have to deal with them with a very long spoon and subject to a long list of conditions. We had to pass an act in Parliament to make sure that Chinese companies, all government-backed, could not have influence and stakes in critical infrastructure projects in the UK. We haven't had to do that with any other country in the world. So of course we've got to deal with them, but we cannot deal with them on the same basis. And let's blow this myth of they're our second largest trading partner, they're a huge economy. They are our largest trading deficit. Last year, we imported £72.5 billion worth of Chinese goods, stuff that we shouldn't need to import in many cases, and that's rising. We exported to China £30.5 billion worth of goods, and that is falling. That's a huge deficit. We exported £52 billion worth of stuff to tiny Ireland. So let's put it into perspective that we should not be sacrificing our principles, international common law norms, in order to do more trade with this very dictatorial regime in China.
Tim Lawton, former Member of Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham, who was sanctioned and still is by China. Thank you very much for talking to us.